Hello, everybody. We've got another wonderful day of Scoopmas, and it really rained. It was really pouring scoops today. We're gonna have a total of 10 cards to cover today, which is absolutely wild. We've been going for an hour with four. I'm gonna hope that we don't go for 2.5 hours with 10, but we'll see. But along for the ride, I've got three wonderful guests today. I've got Tberton, he, him. Hello.
Hey,
I've got izzystardust, she, they.
Hello.
And on holiday, she, her.
Howdy, y'all.
And I'll now that they've all said hello very quickly, I'll maybe go double back and have them actually give a little bit more introduction to themselves. And maybe, you know what, just to spice it up, we'll do it in reverse order. So on holiday, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Holly. I've been playing Netrunner, I don't know, maybe competitively for like a year and a half now. But I played back in college in the height of Geist AR Labs, and that kind of defined what Netrunner was to me. So you know, I'm excited to see what we've got cooking up today with Jinteki and NBN.
Great. That's man, Geist Levy was such a deck. uh, but all right. Well, so Izzy, how about you next?
Hey, all. Yeah, your reverse card isn't going to get me. I'm still in the middle. I've been playing Netrunner like a year and a half now, and I'm also a member of Queering the Message, a queer-focused testing group, and I am so excited for this new set.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I guess Tberton, you're last but certainly not least.
hey, I'm Thomas. I go by Tberton on Discord and JNet. I started playing Netrunner in about 2013, right near the end of the Genesis cycle. And then I fell out, as many people did, around the end of the Mumbad cycle. And then I got back into the game about beginning of 2022, so about a year and a half ago.
Very cool. Well, it's great. We've got people from all different eras of Netrunner here to talk about some great spoilers. And normally I vamp for quite a bit, but I think honestly, maybe in the interest of time, we should just dive in with the very first spoiler. Sounds good?
Yep.
Cool. All right, this first one. Oh, and of course I should have practiced the names for all of these, but this is Chrysiopean Skimming. It is a one-cost event in the criminal faction. Its text is the court may reveal an agenda from HQ. If they do, gain a click and draw one card. Otherwise, look the top 3 cards of R&D. And this is one influence. First thoughts
You
from
pronounced
anyone?
it pretty well.
Of all the spoilers today, this one is definitely the one I'm the most. This is a card about. I don't know if this is going to be great, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
My first instinct when I saw this was like, there has to be something that this is interacting with that makes me really excited about it. And so maybe we'll see something that makes me go, oh damn, this is exactly where I want to be in Crim, having that access to the top of R&D. But I feel like the Punisher style cards where the corp gets to choose um, ends up feeling a lot weaker to me on the runner side.
Yeah, I generally agree. Like, I think this is a card you're gonna start a lot of crim decks putting like 3 copies in, and when you get down to it, have to cut all of them. But it's a card that it's a card that when you draw it, you're gonna feel pretty decent about playing. Um, I think it like gives the corp 2 bad choices, which is kind of interesting.
I feel like this card in particular is a card that's going to be really good for newer players. Like, not necessarily in the sense that it's a handicap, but in the sense that, like, this kind of gameplay, I think, is really fun when you're starting to get into Netrunner, when you haven't quite been poisoned by trying to win tournaments yet. Like, this kind of effect of, like, how can I best use my resources, like, spending resources to make that decision, it's a really cool space to play in. Even if this isn't going to be competitively viable, would be my hot take on this one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I actually hadn't considered that perspective, but just like as a new player, it gives you the info like, oh, now I see something on R&D, now's the time to run R&D. Or the corp just, revealed their 5-3, like now's the time to pressure HQ, and that information being super valuable as opposed to it being something that you've just been trying to intuit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally. Because like your play pattern is probably to play this and then to use that to make your decision about where do you play your Estobrado targeting, right?
yeah, that was the interaction I was going to call out. Like, I think if this does have a competitive home, it's in Mercury with like Hermes, where you play it, you find out where an agenda is, then you vibrato it, that you vibrato that server, get the agenda, and then bounce a card back to HQ with Hermes. I think that's the kind of high end play with this card.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think.
and
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I think when I'm playing this card, I almost never want the corp to reveal an agenda. Because if it's like, oh, you probably had one there anyway. I want to see the top three cards of R&D every time. And the click in a card for a credit feels kind of bad.
Yeah, that's my hunch as well, is that, like, as the corp, you just show them the agenda that's in your hands because both you and the runner know there's an agenda there, and usually it's just too much effort for the runner to really get it, and even if they're seeing one extra card, like, that's still a two, they have to find the 1 in 5 on 2 accesses. Odds are still pretty decently in your favor, and so your opponents just, like, put one of their 45 cards into an effect that didn't really do much and cost them a credit, which I don't think I mind too much as the corp. Whereas letting them know what my next 3 turns are going to look like does kind of sting quite a bit.
I think the one interesting part, like about that logic, which I totally agree with, is if everyone kind of plays agreeing with that logic, there are certain cases, especially maybe earlier in the game, maybe if the corp mulliganed, where if they don't reveal an agenda in HQ and let you see R&D in an R&D, it might actually suggest that they don't have one agenda, they have like 3, in which case it might actually be correct to, Mercury HQ or Legwork HQ or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's always that element in these in like any kind of like games where there's a correct choice that some percentage of the time you should bluff that you don't have the thing. So like that will
Well,
always be an element with this where like, oh, if it's always correct for the corp to show an agenda and then they choose not to and then install a card on their next turn, the runner can go, oh, I know it's not an agenda and it actually is. Like that's a fun second level order or second order kind of bluffing thing. But I think in
yeah,
practice
and
that's
like
just not going to be what happens too often.
if I'm playing this as the runner, I'm trying to play this at a time when I have decided that the corp doesn't have agendas, right? Like I'm trying to make that decision if the run on R&D is worth it. Like I'm trying to prove that they don't have the agenda. It's
Yeah,
not, I think, so much a thing I'm going to play to like suss out there's one in HQ. I don't want there to be one in HQ. Making a dig on R&D is much more reliable.
yeah, that's actually a really interesting point that I hadn't considered. Like, if you know that the corp doesn't have a agenda in HQ, it becomes much stronger. And there's also like some Hail Mary play with this card where it's like corpse on game point, you can't get into the remote, and you just want to find, and maybe you're on game point too, and you just want to know, should I run R&D or should I run HQ? There's some play around that as well.
But like even in that case, you're spending a click and a credit to do that. And should you just spend that click running HQ or running R&D and
Right,
touching the
right,
card?
Yeah,
right.
and also like the obviously this has been spoiled alongside Mercury, and so it's with the multi-access on R&D in mind, but there's no built-in multi-access. If you see the third card down as an agenda, unless you're set up to do something about that ahead of time, it might just sit there staring at you.
Yeah, I think these are all really good points, and I think it'll be really interesting to see where this card ends up because I've seen people be all over the map on evaluating this card. I think is it your comment? This is probably going to mostly be in newer players' decks, and then it gets cut over time. I think is the kind of path I most likely expect to see, but you never know. It could be a real power player. But I think maybe we'll move on to the next card, which I think is one that everyone was very excited about. We initially saw it in the card fan. It is what I think is going to be. I've already seen one person claim it's a profile pick, Capybara. This is a 2-cost hardware. It says whenever you bypass a piece of ice, you may remove this hardware from the game to de-res that ice. This is a 2 influence card in Crim.
I'll jump in. I'm pretty high on this card. I think that like the obvious comparison is Hippo. Hippo has a significantly more powerful effect, but with Hippo, you have to pay to break the ice. So you pay a lot more and you get a lot more effect out of Hippo. And at some point, like paying 2 credits to then make your inside job cost the corp 8 credits later feels like it's probably good enough.
Yeah, this is like one thing to keep in mind on this is basically every bypass card in the game, barring any that haven't been spoiled yet, costs 2 credits. So this is basically says spend 2 cards and 4 credits to derez the piece of ice of your choice, barring some like weird placement stuff around inside job and Vibrato and stuff. But that's the kind of, I think, math you've got to use when evaluating this, as opposed to Hippo, which could be, if you're breaking like a Fairchild with like Blork or something, that's what, like 9 credits. So that's I think a strong point in its favor.
Yeah, I
I'll
think
also just point out it's whenever you bypass a piece of ice, it's not the first piece of ice you bypass each turn.
yeah, no, there's not.
Absolutely.
I guess we'll talk about later, like a way for you to bypass the non-first piece of ice, but it is more common to bypass the first piece of ice. Though I guess there's also, even in current standard, always have a backup plan, so you can hit their big ice, get ended the run or whatever, and then go back and capybara that big annoying ice,
Yeah,
which can
and
definitely be something.
there's backstitching, and Estebrado like gives you the option to kind of like Estebrado is you bypass the first, but then the threat ability, if there's more than one ice, you can spend a click on the threat ability for any future ice on the server, or one future ice on the server, but it's of your choice, I think. Um, so that I think there's a little bit more flexibility than just inside job in terms of like outermost ice kind of situation.
I'm also going to shout out to Sanjay asking a question that is definitely not relevant to him, but says, does this get around Anansi? I'm not that good at rules and also not judging any major tournaments this weekend. And the answer is yes. Capybara does get around the Anansi 3 credit damage because Anansi, this will trigger when you pass the piece of ice. And so, or when you're bypassing it, which actually happens before the encounter ends, then Anansi is derez, so its text is no longer active, which is a very nice little interaction.
Yeah, it's kind of like the inverse of the inside job toll booth interaction. Rather than skipping it ahead, you kind of skip it behind.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to this. I'm in terms of like a strategic thing, but I do want to say that in that initial fan, I saw Capybara and I was like, that's criminal Hippo. I'm calling it right now. 3 people heard me, but one of them's my fiance, so no one's gonna believe me.
I think the real trick with this card is like with Hippo, you don't need to include additional support to make this work.
Right,
Like Hippo
right.
just works off your breakers, and this requires you to have bypass in some manner in your deck. And presumably, there's not going to be enough bypass in the set for a runner to not play breakers at all. Like, as much as I love breakerless Crim, it seems like probably a not viable competitive idea, let's say.
You're breaking my
Um,
heart. That's the first deck I'm gonna build as soon as the cards are live on JNet.
But it's like it's an interesting question, right? Like as soon as you're now putting a breaker suite in, putting econ in, putting bypass in to like stretch out your econ a bit, like do you now have the slots for Capybara at the competitive level? Like that's the real question with this card.
Yeah, slots are a big problem. I do think like you three, I mean, you'd love to have three, but I think that's probably stretching it slot wise. I think it ends up being more one or two if you do end up including it. One thing I think kind of similar to Hippo, but maybe even more so because the counterplay is a little bit tougher on the corp end, is like the chilling effect that this has when it's on the board. Especially like, you know, if you're, let's say the corp had, like, you could almost do it like a Val blackmail kind of situation where you put Capybara on the table, you never run the remote. Let's say the corp has multiple ice on it, and you only inside job or whatever, you have your bypass tool when they go to score an agenda. And like, are they gonna res ice on that run when you're just gonna derez it immediately and bypass it? Like that, I don't know. That seems like a tough calculation for the corp.
It's also a really interesting interaction with like border control, where if you like inside job a remote protected by border control, the corp now has to res and immediately use border control. And it's with the same timing as Hippo as deciding whether they want to um break the border control open and keep you out, because if you bypass it and de-res it, you're getting into that server. They lose that border control tax that really makes the card so pushed, that ability to make you pay for all the ice all the way into the server and then be like, nope, you got to come back.
Yeah,
Capybara
yeah,
like makes them decide to do that up front, which is a really interesting thing for like where does the corp now place border control as a positional ice. Um,
yeah. You know,
Yeah.
a really funny interaction with this card that it just occurred to me. If you have a magnet on the board and the corp, or if you have a hush on the board and the corp reses their magnet, it pulls your magnet over to their hush, and then you can de-res the magnet with the hush already on it, and then they will lose the on-res ability of the magnet when they try to re-res the magnet because the hush will already be on it. Right? I think that works. I might be wrong about that.
yep, that works.
I just realized that you guys just talked for several minutes with me muted and no one noticed, and it was just fine. So that's all good. But yeah, no, I think this is a really interesting card, and it maybe to me like the card I kind of expected people to mention, but hasn't been mentioned, is Emergency Shutdown, which is like the initial comparison point I think to me for this card. And Emergency Shutdown hasn't been relevant in quite a while, but I do kind of wonder if being like kind of bankable and not dependent on making runs on HQ is like a pretty significant strength increase for this, and maybe does allow Crim that otherwise wouldn't include a lot of bypass effects. Like suddenly you're one of the issues off with bypass effects is like they work once and then you're kind of losing any, like you have to find a whole nother one. And Capybara kind of ends up being a like a bypass effect multiplier if you can keep the corpse econ low, which is a kind of pretty standard criminal game plan.
I'd
Yeah,
almost be thinking a lot about this alongside like forged activation orders and that sort of style of 419 of like just gonna be as absolutely devastating on the corp econ as you can, force them into making this like these bad choices into like the 3, 4, 5 credit games.
yeah. I think, like, to be honest, we're talking all about the various like DRes interactions here, but I think like a lot of DRes cards, the thing that hurts this the most is the fact that account siphon doesn't exist. Like the big thing that helped her with like something like emergency shutdown early on was that you emergency shutdown HQ or whatever, and then you siphoned them. And then they couldn't res any ice and you de-res their big ice. And so I think this is a card that like if when Doof rotates, whatever replaces that is a little bit more tempo positive for the runner. This is a card that could maybe become a bit more of a beast. Yeah.
I think Capybara is going to be used a lot for run backs. Like you make that first run on the server and you de-res the piece of ice that the corp can't necessarily afford to re-res, or if they do, it's enough of an econ hit that you can get in elsewhere. And one of the problems with something like emergency shutdown is it costs you a click to do it on the turn that you need to get back in.
Right,
And so
right.
Capybara being something that you set up ahead of time has a sort of similar effect to Hippo, where when you finally get to that turn where the click compression matters, now you've got the ability to do it clicklessly on something you were already doing that you wanted to do anyway.
I also think, and maybe this is a way to segue, but I think this card is going to be uh, like the power level of the next card we talk about is going to kind of heavily impact the power level of this card because I think they go really nicely together.
Well, I mean, I can't pass up a segue like that. So let's move on to Laser Pointer. The next card is it actually? I don't. Oh shoot, I missed the numbers. Okay, there's a couple cards in between, but the next card we got spoiled today was Laser Pointer. This is a 2-cost 1 MU program weapon subtype in Crim. It says whenever you encounter a piece of AP, destroyer, or observer ice, you may trash this program to bypass that ice. And this is a 3 influence program.
Yeah, there immediately three cards come to mind when I see this is Fairy, Deus Ex, and Sharpshooter, like the classic kind of break in case of emergency breakers that used to be around. And I think Fairy import like obviously being the Crim card among those three is the one that feels the most similar to me. Um, because as somebody, I think somebody mentioned this in GLC this morning, but barring whatever new ice get revealed, this covers basically every sentry in the game, except for Crafter, I think, is the only one that does not have one of those three subtypes.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. We've got like,
Or maybe the only one you care about.
yeah, Ansel. I'm like trying to think of what other like Vasilissa, Stavka. Like these are all like when I'm thinking about building a corp deck, like these are all the sentries I'm including, and these all have destroyer, observer, uh, or all of the very very many Jinteki,
This is cute
APs.
Tithonium tech,
Yeah.
but I feel like for one more credit, I'd rather just install Begalter.
That is certainly
Well,
true.
Buckler is not Tithonium tech, very notably.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
the Begalter does not help with Tithonium.
yeah, that's definitely the case. I think it's Bagalter is always going to crowd out any kind of sentry space for sure, just by nature of its existence. I do think there's maybe a case you could make for if we're trying to play the bypass crim. This lets you deal with a lot of sentries, and it does let you deal with them on centrals. I mean, obviously with the new crim with Mercury, you want to put this on centrals, um, but it's it is going to have that thing where it's maybe a bit too cute for a regular. It's like it's not going to fit in a reg deck for the most part, I
Yeah.
think.
I was
I
gonna
do
say,
think it is so funny that laser pointer is a weapon.
I love the flavor on this card. Just to start off, like I'm in love with the flavor of laser pointers as like anti-observer tech, right? Anti-camera, um, that kind of thing as a mirror to sort of real world stuff. Um, but I do think that Bugalter point is really salient. That like for one influence and one credit extra, you can go to the best sentry breaker in the game. And especially considering I don't think that this has the favorable interaction for the runner with Anansi. I think that you
It
do
yeah,
end
if
up
you
taking the
bypass
three.
yeah, if you bypass an Nazi, you get the hit. Which is why I was saying it goes really nicely with Capybara, because if you have a Capybara on the table, you bypass the Nazi with the laser pointer, and then you pop the Capybara to de-res the Anansi before the spider catches you.
Yeah, I mean the biggest problem is now we're using a 2 card combo that we get to use one to de-res the Nazi once, which is definitely going to be always a little bit niche.
Yeah.
But I think this is still a really cool little piece of tech, and maybe this goes in Arasana, right? You do the old school shaper thing of splashing the Deus Ex and the Sharpshooter in the faction that wants to get those the most, and this is like your way to quickly and cheaply deal with nasty things that your engine's not quite set up to be. Because like Echelon is, I think, like my default sentry breaker in, honestly, even in like Eternal, I think right now in Shaper. Um, but this card takes time to Echelon takes time to charge up, so maybe you just eat the 3 inf tax and just say, oh, I'm going to use this as a safety card in the way that like Deus Ex and Sharpshooter were historically.
Yeah, but like people don't play Revolver now as a 2-cost way to deal with sentries super cheap in the
Right.
early game.
Right. That's a good point.
I do need to review the timing chart for the run because I don't know if you're running with this in hand as Arasana and the corp reses a sentry with one of those types. Do you have that paid ability window before the on encounter to get the card installed?
You do.
After they've decided to res it. I can't remember offhand if that's the case. And that's going to make a huge difference to how playable this is in Arasana.
Yeah, so you do. This is like one of the really cool things about Arasana is like the corp reses ice during approach, and then you have a paid ability window because that's the only way that the corp could actually res the ice. I guess not the only way. You could rules a bunch of ways, but the way the game is set up, you have this on approach paid ability window where the runner, like, that's usually where the runner actually goes and you cracks the SMC, but we just hand wave it all into one action, because like for example in Golo, it has to be fetched while you're in that approach step rather than in that encounter step with the ice.
So, but that's after they get to res, right? So is there
Yes. So
okay, yeah.
yeah, so the way it works, right, is that, so technically what happens, but no one ever does this, is the runner is approaching the ice and they say, I'm going to use no paid ability windows. Though maybe you do want to be Arasana and you want to put a Cubon down on that paid ability window for if the corp chooses to not res. But most of the time you're going to say, okay, I'm approaching the ice. It's my paid ability window. I'm not going to do anything. Corp, would you like to use any paid ability windows? The corp then reses their ice and says, I'm done using paid abilities for now. Runner, would you like to use any more paid abilities? Because you always have to get 2 passes in a row for a paid ability to close in Netrunner.
Right.
And so then the runner can say, oh, I'm going to put down this laser pointer. And then they get to bypass and go. So that's the timing structure of the run.
That's pretty cool.
Someone was asking if this gets around Funhouse, and it does not. Funhouse is, I guess, to me, kind of surprisingly, just a code gate, not an observer.
Yeah.
I usually think of observers as giving tags, but I think actually someone I forget who was it. Oh shoot, someone in GLC, and I will have to go and find out who, did a very nice Venn diagram of how weird the observer subtype is in Netrunner.
Subtypes in general, little inconsistent. FFG never quite figured that out.
Yeah, Data Raven was an observer, which is probably why you're thinking that, Jeff. Because of like Funhouse is so close. But yeah, that's quite too bad.
Yeah. All right. Well, do we want to move on to the next card now that we've thoroughly dunked on Laser Pointer? So the next one in numerical order is Mindscaping. This is our first corp card of the day, first of many, honestly. And this is a 2-cost operation subtyped Gray Ops. It has the text, resolve one of the following. Option 1, gain 4 credits and draw 2 cards. Add 1 card from HQ to the top of R&D. And option 2, do X net damage. X is equal to the number of tags the runner has, up to 3. And this is 2 influence. Who's got first thoughts for me here?
I've got thoughts. I think people, from the reactions I've seen to this card today, like I think people are way low on this card. I think this card is extremely good and is gonna have like quite like its mere existence. Like even if it doesn't see a ton of like play or it's not like the strongest card you put in your deck, its existence is gonna change the way you play against Team Techie for one, and gonna change the way you play against a lot of decks that might be packing kill packages. Because what this basically says is you can include a kill card in your deck for the cost of one of your economy card slots. It basically is 2 cards for the price of 1. It's not great at doing either of those things, but the secret hidden text is that it covers the roles of 2 cards in your deck and only takes up 1 slot.
And I'm interested in this card. I think maybe not as highly as you, but I was definitely thinking about this sort of as a role filler because it's doing a bad impression of End of the Line, and an even worse impression of Boom once we lose that. But the gain 4, draw 2, and the little R&D shuffle is cute. Locks up the R&D, especially if you're playing something like PE, where you can just put a sting on there, you put a snare back down. You're in faction for that.
This is one of those cards where if you're just playing it for value, it's probably not going to quite make the slot in your deck. But this is definitely a card that could just slot into the right deck. There's been so many decks that would happily pay 2 credits for 1 net damage at the right time. There's been so many decks that would happily try to tag storm to the point where they could get a kill with this. It's a really interesting way to not end up in that situation where you're sitting there and your hand is 2 econ warfare, hard hitting news, boom, boom, and no ice.
Yeah,
Like, it's interesting. There's places this definitely fits, and I really like the idea of early game playing this and then eventually spinning it back in.
yeah,
I think it depends on, sorry, I think it depends
no,
on
it's fine.
the particular deck needing it, but I think this definitely has a specific role that it plays that there will be decks that will look for. And it just remains to be seen how good the rest of the shell is to support that. I think that this piece absolutely meets the requirements of a shell like that to be good in it, though.
Yeah, I think some people have been thinking about it. From what I've seen, people have been talking about it as like a primary kill card, and I don't think, like, I think what was said earlier was absolutely right. Like, you use this as the finisher when you have end of the line. You still are usually going to need 2 tags for a kill because you get the 2 damage off of this, and then 4 damage off the end of the line. For 6 for the kill. But if they only have 1 tag and under 5 cards, which, in certain types of like fast outfit decks, you might be able to fork them into forcing them to do that, depending on like what sort of tag punishment situation like you have with it. It's like I guess without hard hitting news, like that's a little bit more of a question to be able to pull that off. But like, this isn't the card you play to deal the bulk of the damage. You play this first, you send your psychic clones after them, and then you send your hitman to go shoot them in the head.
I think also like it might with Boom leaving, especially, it's probably going to change the math on the runner side for how many tags you're willing to float. Because right now, if you're in a competitive setting, if you're passing versus someone who you think is going to be on it, or you have seen hard hitting news, you have to go below 2 tags. Otherwise, the game's just over. And now maybe there's more games where you can actually get forked into floating 2 or 3 tags.
Yeah, I think there's a situation because it's like end of the line is always going to like, you can kind of know pretty happily that like, oh yeah, if I know the contents of the corpse hand pretty well, like end of the line's gonna let me live as long as I'm sitting on 4, and like mindscaping maybe gives you a little bit of extra reach to go through. Though probably you want it to be at 2 tags to do like a mindscaping end of the line for 6. Though I guess there's also the very funny line of mindscaping, end of the line as a 3-card combo. But I feel like at that point, well, actually, I guess it's even influence on both sides. So I think like it's one of the interesting things about this is being at 2 influence does seem like it's vaguely in the splashable range. Though definitely, if you're doing that, you need to be pretty all in on Tag Storm, I think.
My huge open question is how hard is it to stick 3 tags in this meta without news?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I don't think you're ever playing this for 3 damage.
I guess the counterpoint is also this is going to be a meta without misdirection, which means that if there are other ways to grind up tags, then maybe they will stick around a little bit more than they have.
Yeah, or if you land a mutually assured destruction for like 4 or 5 tags and they can't, they're low on money or something. Yeah. I think the one other thing to think about this is that Jinteki economy is really bad. And so Jinteki decks, like even regular Jinteki decks, will consider slotting this. Or at least the runner will have to consider that the corp considered slotting it. And so I think it's going to be really difficult to play Tag Me against Jinteki. Like putting aside corp tagging cards like Snare or whatever. But like if you're playing a Tag Me Zaya deck, if that deck still exists without Obelisk, it's going to be hard to do that if there's a decent chance that the corp played 3 mindscaping just for the money effect because Kentucky has no other cards that say credits.
Yeah, I mean, you see a copy of this in the Swiss and you're like, well, I'm clearing the tag from Snare now for sure.
Yeah.
Even if they don't care about that and just want the money. I don't know. This is, I also think, a card that probably has the potential to be like a dud in this meta, but then like in 2 years come out of nowhere and surprise people as a key part of a deck.
Yeah, for sure. I feel that way about a lot of the current cards we talked about earlier too. They're kind of interesting to have in the card pool, even if they're not necessarily great right now.
I'm excited to stew on this one.
Cool. I think with that, maybe we'll move on to, I think, the last Jinteki card. Let me check real quick because, yeah, we've had a million cards spoiled today. Almost all NBN because I miscalculated on people's preferences. But anyway, we have Adrian CS as our final Jinteki card of the day. This is a zero cost upgrade, Clone Sysop. And excuse me while I take a deep breath to read a paragraph here. Whenever the runner makes a successful run on this server, play a Psy game. Players secretly bid 0 to 2, then each player reveals and spends their bid. If the bids differ, the runner cannot access cards other than this upgrade for the remainder of that run. If the bids match, the runner cannot access this upgrade for the remainder of that run. When your turn ends, you may move this upgrade to the root of another server. And this is 2 to trash and 4 influence.
My first thought on this is I love the new language for Psy games. It makes it so much easier for me to understand what action I am trying to do to get the outcome I want reading the card.
Yeah, I'm like hallelujah that Saigon got keyworded. It should have happened literally when the first card Saigar got published in the very first data pack that ever got released. It's been around forever. It's a paragraph of text on every card that wants it. Mind game is an abomination, and this is great. Even though this card has a lot of text, it would have more if Saigon wasn't keyworded.
I mean,
Yeah.
from a card perspective too, I'm incredibly excited about this. Like, I think in my mind, the first thing that jumps is Akiko, or not Akiko,
Caprice?
one of the Nisei Sisop, who's I'm blanking on their first name.
Caprice.
Caprice, thank you. Or the NBN trap that forces accesses specifically on it. And I think that
yeah, I mean, I think this is like an interesting like mix between like Caprice and also Ash. Oops, just closed my thing. That was gonna let me pull up Ash real quick. Where Ash kind of was like the, oh, if you did not pay the toll, you can only access Ash. Of course, Ash and Caprice were played a lot back in 2014, 2015 era Netrunner. Or maybe even 2013, 2014 is actually maybe more correct. So like this is like it's an interesting upgrade, and it's got some homages to I think some really all-star powerful cards.
I think Prana PE today really wants this card.
Oh yeah, protect the Prana.
Well, that deck like has a mode where it ends up with 2 remotes, and it's one of the very few decks that can do this in a way that's meaningful. And you're either alternating between protecting the Prana in one remote and the Keeling in the other, and having this kind of flexibility to say which one are you protecting more and to change that up is really interesting, because one of the problems that deck can have is you end up committing your defensive resources to one place or another and end up like making it so that you need to now protect the new thing, but your resources are in the wrong spot for it. It's the same sort of interesting thing of comboing with the Atea ability, of course, to have it be the Atea install for a free click, and then at the end of your turn, put it into the server that you wanted it in the first place.
Yeah, I hadn't seen anybody talk about that interaction yet today, so I'm glad you brought that up because like that's a really fun interaction and like something that's not obvious. The fact that you can move this around is really good. It means that one of the things that happens with defensive. This is like my favorite Corp card we've seen. I love this card. Ash Caprice RP was my favorite Corp deck ever. And like one of the things that happens with uh, uh, defensive upgrades and remotes is, the runner, if they can't get in when you try to score, they just will sometimes they'll just say, okay, you can have that score. I'm going to get some money next turn when you have nothing to protect. I'm going to run it and force you to either spend a bunch of stuff to protect nothing, or I'm going to blow up your remote. But what something like Adrian lets you do is now you can move that, like, okay, you scored the agenda. Now you move him, to R&D or to HQ or to your second ATIA remote where you've got your, regolith or something that you're chipping away at. And so you kind of move him away from the spot that you need him, or move him towards a safer spot, like kind of as the game progresses in a really interesting dynamic way.
I also want to do a quick shout out to this art. I think it's just one of the most stunning pieces I think I've seen in a Netrunner card. And it's just amazing. I'm like just continue to I've been like I've had the art for this card for a little while now, and it just still blows me away each time. So I like kind of hope this card ends up being part of the meta just because of how cool it looks.
It's really cool.
Yeah. Such good art this set. It is wild. Like I thought Borealis was good, and Borealis was good, but this set is another level.
One other really interesting thing about this card, and I hope that we see either more side games this set or in future sets. Hopefully that the fact that they keyworded it kind of puts a flag in the sand there. But I love that this is a side game with like a consolation prize. I I I love side games, but I know a lot of people don't like the sort of variance of them, and it feels good that like I think it ends up feeling good even if the runner wins the side game and gets to steal your stuff. Well, at least they don't get to take your upgrade. You get it for the future, and vice versa. If they get the upgrade, then they wanted to steal your stuff, but at least they get to trash the upgrade. It's kind of it's got an interesting double-sided sword to factor to it there.
Yeah,
It'd
and
be fun to win the side game on top of 2 Warroids.
I was gonna say the Warride interaction with this is pretty gross. Having to either crash it
Yeah.
and take the Warride hit, or just say I'm gonna win the side game harder next time.
Yeah, I think the Warrior interaction with this is pretty gross. You can just like put that on repeat, walk away, and just have that be a comment that plays over every upgrade. It's I think it was Warroid that's a gross card.
Yeah, I mean there definitely is a little bit of extra amplification with the Warroid Adrian interaction for sure. I am also on very much the oh man, Warroid is made for a meta with every runner having one link and probably having a Temujin amount of credits. But hey, it makes it's not like a atrocious card in all circumstances.
Just light the fire that remote, that double Warroid Adrian remote. That solves your problem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I also
reduce your hand size by 1, please.
I also want to give Lethea Nisei, which to me like definitely feel like it's kind of interesting to see Adrian, which I think like there's I think never a reason to run Lethea Nisei anymore. I think Adrian's yes basically is going to do everything you want Lethea Nisei to do, but better. Um, which I don't think anyone is going to mind because Lethea Nisei was as someone who even did put it in a couple of decks for 1 or 2 test games. It was a rough one to use.
Yeah,
It's
he's like
interesting that the trigger is on successful run.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I wonder if it has something to do with like how access candidates are determined and stuff, because it like Lethea, the successful run trigger is weird because she ends the run, but Adrian doesn't end the run, so it doesn't feel as weird as something like that, or like Giordano, where the it's always weird that a successful run can then get ended before you get to do the thing you wanted to do. Um, I'm kind of curious why they chose to phrase it that way.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Um, all right, I think maybe with this we will. Someone was asking, does move to root equal install? So moving an installed card into another installed location it is not going to trigger a Taya. Just sliding a card from place to place, I think, and pending what I'm sure will be an update in rules. I think the way it's going to work with installing cards from hand is a little bit up to debate, and I'll let rules handle that when they do what I'm sure will be their inevitable update for this cycle. And I think it's even teased that they're going to have a rules article and stuff coming up in the near future. But I think maybe. And Jamie shouting out Tberton for getting it right for successful run setting access values. So that's a cool, good catch. I think maybe let's move on to the first of our 5 NBN cards that got spoiled today. So I hope everyone's ready to settle in and talk about some yellow. Our first one up is Oracle Think Tank. This is a 3-1 research subtype agenda. When the runner steals this agenda, give them one tag, and then it has the ability click, remove one tag, shuffle this agenda into R&D. The corp can use this ability only if this agenda is in the runner's score area.
I think
It's
the
like
first and most obvious comparison is 15 minutes. The sort of fake point with maybe a little bit of tomorrow's headline on steal, take a tag kind of punishment. But I don't know how excited I am about really putting this in a deck and intending to score it.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like 15 minutes, tomorrow's headline, and quantum predictive model all got together and adopted a child to raise together in some and make it in all their images.
Yeah, it's a really weird one because like you don't it's not clear exactly what yellow deck wants to run a 3-1, but at the same time I feel like so many yellow decks would be pretty happy to give the runner a tag, play one card that uses that tag, and then shuffle this card back into their deck when the runner starts to approach a game point. Um, it's like so it's got this really weird niche where it feels like we gotta figure out where it sits, and then like it seems to like if it can find that home, it'll be really impactful. But 3-1s are also like such a kludgy agenda to hold.
Yeah, like this is cute and like that Arella combo Reality Plus that was going around for a while. Like there were 3-1s in that it was trying to score as part of the combo turn, and this is like a nice one for that in a lot of ways. That early game with the runner touches it just gives you gas, and then you go get it back if you need to, and you've got some control over how deep you need to play your not game changer, the other one, but
Fast
um
break.
fast break. Thank you, the one that's not banned. It's interesting. Like it could see play in a deck that wants a 3-1, and those are fairly uncommon, I think.
It's got an interesting interaction with Epiphany, though, which I guess is appropriate because basically it lets you get an Epiphany trigger. Provided it lets you get an Epiphany trigger for free because they steal it. You get a counter on your ID, and then they've got the tag, and I guess they can clear the tag. So it depends on the timing there, but you can then shuffle it back, and you still get your tempo ability. And also, I think Epiphany values the shuffle a little bit because if they've looked at the top three cards and don't see anything they like, they can, they'd like to be able to shuffle to get more, depending on how many power counters they've got on their ID.
I think like a lot of the 3-1s that do see play in yellow typically, like in asset decks in particular, are like Ares and things where you sort of you don't care if they steal it because it's a 1-pointer, but what you're really looking for is the ongoing effect. And this doesn't have an ongoing effect that really makes you excited to score this out as an asset deck, even if you just throw it on the table at some point. And if the runner touches it, they touch it, it's fine. But like you're really not interested in actually spending up a return to score it out, I think, as yellow. Whereas something like Ares, you absolutely are.
Yeah,
And
for
so
sure.
like
You don't want to score this ever.
And I feel like there's just in yellow, like I don't particularly want to be playing agendas that I don't want to score. Like I want to be scoring, you know, points and winning games, unless I'm on a hard, tag and bag. But yeah, post like you saying we just put up post truth dividend. It feels really awkward to just have one extra advancement for a kind of taxing steal effect.
The shuffle back also kind of has an interesting, we haven't seen many threat cards yet, but there could be situations where like the shuffling back the agenda and lowering the threat threshold of the game could actually be kind of notable on both sides. Like there might be times where you don't want to do it because as the corp you need the threat to be at a certain level and the runner has more points than you, or vice versa. So there's some interesting aspects to it there as well.
I think it's cute and playable in the right deck.
Yeah, I think that's I think finding that right deck is going to be a thing. Maybe Reality Plus just loves this because it's a free gain 2 credits and then, at very little cost, and that's always an effect you don't mind, and it just becomes annoying for the runner to handle. But it's very tricky to see exactly what the home is going to be like. Our next card up is a super late breaking, and as far as I'm aware, not entirely intentional spoiler, but one that went up, and I've been told if I did not report on this one, I would not be doing my journalistic integrity. That thing I definitely have. So we've got Behold. This is a zero cost asset ambush. While the runner is accessing this asset in R&D, they must reveal it. When the runner accesses this asset anywhere except in archives, you may pay 4 credits to give them 2 tags. This is 0 to trash and 2 influence. And the flavor text, which I have not been reading for most of these, but I think is worth it here, is simply be afraid.
I have been trying to make Amaze Amusements work for so long, and now I can just play this, and I am so happy.
My first thought is however much money you're paying Scott it's not enough. This is like an absolutely incredible piece of art, and if it's not on a playmat within the next year, then something's gone terribly wrong.
It's just it's a home run in terms of the look, in terms of the feel. Like you even gotta shout out the flavor text. Be afraid, right? It puts you on the spot, and it feels like a sort of good companion to Snare, which is a really iconic, scary effect that you always want to be playing around when you're playing versus Jinteki, and it's being ported to a new color.
I love that this gives us the snare R plus interaction of the runner touches snare on R&D and you draw it while they're accessing it in yellow. That's gonna be a thing.
The thought I had about this card looking at it today was in an asset spam yellow mutually assured destruction deck. I think this has an interesting role where you put it on the table, which you don't normally want to do with central ambushes, but you put it on the table, and if the runner runs it, great. You pay for it, give them 2 tags, and if they don't run it, you've got a 0 cost res to trigger Mad Whip, and if they run it and trash it, and your Epiphany, then they're also giving you tempo to go and find more assets to put on the board.
Yeah, I was chatting about this on my travels today with a person I was traveling with, and it's very weird because there's never been a yellow deck that's really wanted to where it's been correct to splash for snare, and so it's like a little bit tricky to figure out. Is this card is giving the runner 2 tags or 4 credits on their turn like an effect you really want? And my hunch is the answer is yes. 2 tags is a huge setback for the runner, and NBN has a ton of ways to damage, to make that count. But it's just a weird deck piece that I think you have to kind of reevaluate how you build yellow decks if you want to include this.
If they touch this on their second click, they're spending the rest of their turn in 4 credits. If they touch this on click 3, they're floating a tag into your turn, and God forbid they run last click. That feels like a huge difference to snare to me in yellow is that second tag.
Yeah, and if your Epiphany, they trash it, they trigger your ability. If you have an Ares scored, they track. I guess is Ares only installed cards?
No, this Ares is trash the first time the runner trashes a corp card.
What a stupid card. Yeah, if you have that scored, then they can't even trash it without taking another tag.
I don't want to sound too down on it because I think it's a really strong card, but I do think that the snare synergy of doing damage, putting the runner down, especially in Jinteki right now, where you actually feel like you have a reasonable chance of just killing someone, means that this feels a little more vegan to me in terms of the soft touch on the punishment. Um, but I
Yeah,
do think it's going to be good. I just don't know if it's going to be as sort of omnipresent as Snare.
yeah, I think this one sort of like, if you like, it kind of needs something like a hard hitting news to back it up, because it's like, oh yeah, if the runner, like, let's say the runner does respect Behold and only runs clicks 1 and 2, right? Or, and it's like, okay, well, I've slowed the runner down, made them maybe run a little suboptimally, but how do I actually get some leverage out of that? It's like, oh yeah, well, if they can spend, I spend 4, they spend 4 and 2 clicks, maybe I'm coming out ever so slightly ahead, and that makes it a little bit easier for me to like go gain some credits, land a hard hitting news to like close the deal. But hard hitting news is gone, and so that's going to make this card a little bit trickier to kind of slot into places.
I think this is a card that's going to see, regardless of how good it is competitively, a ton of casual play, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah,
there's a lot of people, including some people in the chat, saying, no, Snare's really good in a lot of places. And it's like, yeah, Snare will do things. It tends to be a little bit more casual card, and maybe Behold will end up in that same place. But, like, Snare is a card you still have to play around, and Behold will probably just become one of those cards you have to start playing around a little bit as the runner. So.
the
I'm
the
just excited to yell "Behold" at the kitchen table.
And I think it'll feel a lot better for the runner to touch up a hold on 2 cards and not just suddenly lose the game. Like, they might lose the next turn when the runner goes or when the corp goes and plays under the line, but like the snare death that is kind of the bane of a lot of casual netrunner just doesn't happen with this card, and so it feels a little better in that way, I think, casually.
Yeah. Um, let's move on to the next NBN card. This is one I think that's a little bit, well, this card, I have not thought about this card a bunch recently, so I'll be interested to hear what everyone's takes are, and I kind of missed the conversation about it because it got spoiled too early in the morning for me. But this is Federal Fundraising. This is a zero cost asset subtyped political and ritzy. And its text is, when your turn begins, you may look at the top 3 cards of R&D and arrange them in any order. Then, if the server is not protected by ice, you may draw 1 card. This is 2 to trash and 2 influence.
I can think of some other yellow cards that might have been spoiled in this set that this goes along nicely with.
I imagine
Yeah.
you're... yeah. Oh, sorry.
It feels like great synergy with the new ID, with Behold, with even older stuff like Near Earth Hub, or really sort of any asset yellow spam.
My only real experience with the political assets has been in draft when I took Sensi's Actors Union and Dan B's Hypercube, and that card was busted. So I'm excited to see politicals come back in a way that is maybe less ban worthy. I think this card's cool. I think this card is probably good. Like, the obvious comparison is something like Daily Business Show in terms of like looking at slots for an asset spam deck today, and DBS gets play, and this is maybe more interesting in some decks than something like DBS. It's like really shifting the agenda density problem from like coming back up halfway through the game to staying on top. So like DBS has that going for it, and they're really interesting together, where then you start like putting the Sensi's bottoming stuff back into the mix. I think I'm pretty high on this card. I think it seems pretty reasonably good. I feel like um there are definitely going to be asset spam decks that are going to be trying this out, and whether it actually makes the cut versus the other like very strong assets that are in the game right now remains to be seen, but I'm pretty high on this one.
Yeah, I
yeah,
think at a 2 trash cost, you're not just putting it in anywhere. It has to be something where if the runner goes and takes it, it's significantly like it's advancing your game plan because you're up on tempo or you're up on the counter on the new ID, as opposed to just auto include in a yellow.
yeah, it fills a very similar role to DPS, and I'm interested to see if people end up playing both or go for one or the other, because this has some, significant advantages over, like, obviously the trash cost is lower, and a low trash cost when you don't want it protected by ice is even tougher, but it costs 0, so it's like much cheaper to res. And DBS doesn't actually draw you cards, it just gets you your choice of cards. This draws you, if it's not protected by ice, draws you one more card than you normally would at the end of your turn, which means you can move a fair bit faster, and especially for like an asset spam deck where you always want to have 3 assets in hand, that might be significant.
I think there's also the other thing that's worth mentioning is this also means that you can set the top card R&D to be safe. Like just always, every turn this fires, you can be like, oh cool, I don't need to defend R&D this turn. And it also, I think, interacts with shuffles a little bit better than Daily Business Show does, where, like, if you spent your whole game with Daily Business Show just bottoming all your agendas, sometimes when you crack the Spin Doctor, you're like, oh, time to pay the Reaper. And federal fundraising, like, will have some of that same effect, but you won't feel quite as bad when you shuffle, because you'll be like, okay, cool, my top of R&D is, like, ice, agenda, so this is a great turn to pop my Spin Doctor and reset my density a little bit.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to using this to think that the top of R&D is safe, only to realize that I screwed up and put the wrong card on top and lose the game that way.
I will say, like, I do think that, like, the coming from like Magic, right, where like the experience of looking at the top 3 and then like doing some ordering and putting them back, I think this is going to be a weaker agenda filtering effect than DBS, just because of if you're worried about flooding out, or if you're in that mid game, you can just bottom agendas all day. Your hand's totally safe and clear. Whereas with federal fundraising, you can put it off for a little bit, but without a shuffle, at some point you're going to federal fundraising and you're going to see 3 agendas.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. And I pulled up at the start. We also have we got balanced coverage spoiled. So like there clearly seems to be some kind of intent. And I think between the ID, balanced coverage, and federal fundraising, like there's clearly a lot of intent for there to be some kind of asset spam yellow. And like these 2 cards, which I think are like both kind of semi-playable on their own, become very, very good together. So it's going to be an interesting kind of wait and see, I think, to figure out if there's really something in this combination, or if these end up being pieces that are a little bit more cute than good.
Yeah, and I wonder like what you use to protect them. You don't like obviously you have Epiphany where you're gaining tempo, but you don't have CTM anymore. And you don't have hard-hitting news. So do you use something like hostile architecture or something? Because otherwise, the trash costs are not outrageous on these. So it might be difficult to keep them up, especially, with Miss Bones and, whatever nonsense Hoshiko's running all over the place.
My instinct is just you go hard in the other direction. You say, hey, I'm going to play Near Earth Hub. I'm going to put down 3 every turn. And if you want to take them, you could take all 3, but I'm going to do this again next turn and then the turn after that. And then that's where I'm going to break ahead.
Yeah, I think the fact that this does draw a card, so it's going like in NEH, it like goes past replacing itself. It like draws you an extra tempo, and then in something like Epiphany is going to just replace itself. It's a big deal because, like, yeah, if you can just grind out the runner's econ by just installing more threats than they can handle, eventually you will start gaining some acclimated board or accumulated board state advantage.
Knowing how terrible it's going to feel in Epiphany to click your ID and then look at 3 not installable cards, like knowing that you can use that reliably is going to be nice with this.
Yeah.
And from experience, arranging the top 3 is a much simpler operation than arranging the top 5. Like I've had to sit through Anansi fires. I don't want to. 3 feels more reasonable.
With bacterial programming.
Oh god, yeah, bacterial programming should just be like you just take 5 minutes off the clock for that. Like, oh my goodness. And indexing was also like one of those things where like you had to actually really think for quite a bit. So top 3 is hopefully not too bad, especially because you're going to draw 1 to 2 of those immediately in some cases, which it's going to be how you feel about it. I guess the May on the draw is pretty handy to have in that case. I think, though, let's keep it moving. We're going to move on to another spoiler card. This one is another one people might have missed. Bounty Hunter Sax has done a bunch of great drafting tools. Spoiled this card in his Street Peddler draft, which is sort of like a you get 3 cards, pick one out of a pool that's kind of randomized in a fun way. And this was the card that he got. This is Virtual Service Agent. It is a 2-cost, 2-strength Code Gate Observer. So we got some laser pointer synergy. Whenever the runner passes this ice after encountering it, if they did not break its printed subroutine with a decoder during that encounter, give them 1 tag. And then it has a single subroutine. The runner loses 1 credit. And this is 2 influence. And yeah, Jamie beating me to my own punchline. Oh wait, maybe I don't want a laser pointer bypass this.
Yeah. This is like the weird, like, again, another NBN card that feels like the union of several past cards. Like, this is like Turnpike meets IP block meets pop-up window.
Oops, that's CTM, yeah.
Yeah, I think with Turnpike rotating, most NBN decks that want a Turnpike style effect are probably turning here. I think this is probably not as powerful as Turnpike, and I think that's probably okay because Turnpike was a little pushed.
What, you mean a 2-strength, 2 to res, 3 strength, trace 5 was maybe a little pushed? Who would have thought? Yeah, I think it's. Oh, go ahead, Holly. Sorry.
I was gonna say you can take it because I think that it's hard to sort of evaluate what this ice does because you want to look at sort of like the success rate, right? What happens if they face check, but then also the break rate, right? And I feel like this has got a pretty low break rate for a 2-cost ice. You know, and I don't think there's a decoder in the game that's breaking this for more than 2 credits.
I think the right way to look at this card is as a gear check, like a gear check that doesn't end the run, which is, maybe not great, but like going way back, maybe a good example of something like, Neural EMP or something that has a mean face check, like it lose a credit, take a tag when this is res, sucks. But then you just don't run it again until you find your decoder, and then you break it for like 1 credit or maybe 2 every time. Well, no, you break it for probably 2 credits most times, or 1 if you're playing Buzzsaw.
Yeah, I think
Like, I
that's the other place is like, hey, if endurance was like unbanned for whatever reason in the future, and my dreams were made true, even though I don't think it will ever happen for good reason. Like this ends up becoming a really nice little card because it's like, oh, now the endurance player has to either shake a tag every time they want to go past your virtual service agent, or they have to actually go and find a decoder. And like this is going to work against Botchless, it's going to work against Boomerang, this is going to work against all the bypass tools. Like
it's going to work against Banhar.
It's going to work against Banhar even. Yeah. So like this is going to have a lot of little utility against all of the weird, kind of runner B tools that are available to them. And it's funny that they basically all start with B, and we just move the endurance to boat, and it falls in that category as well.
Yeah, I think it's a neat little card. I think it's gonna, like I said, I think it's gonna feel really annoying when the corp reses this, especially if it's R plus and they do it for free.
Whether I include this is going to depend a ton on the meta, but it's going to be a card that I'm going to be very happy to be able to consider during deck building.
Yeah, this is one of those cards where it's like it can still be a successful card even if it sees play in if it almost never actually sees play, just because runners have to start planning around this card being in the pool and their opponent possibly including it, which is an interesting place for a card to end up.
And as we said, like a lot of NBN ice in this cost range is rotating. So NBN actually doesn't have a ton of other good options. I mean, I guess you got like Basilissa, but other than that, there's like that King and maybe this, and that gives you, if you're a low ice asset spam NBN deck, maybe those are like the 9 ice you play is 3 of each of those.
Yeah, I guess if we are thinking about that asset spam deck, just throwing this on central means that the runner probably does need to actually go and find their decoder, which is a thing they might usually be able to go their whole matchup without really having to find, which is definitely an interesting possibility.
And this
All
is
right.
just another nice piece of art.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I like the colors.
All right, let's move on to our very final spoiler for the day. This was a GLC spoiler. It's still going on. You can do a fun personality quiz, and it includes a user submitted art portion. And I would really encourage people to do it. I think it looked like a lot of fun, and I think there's going to be some kind of mural or mosaic of all of the pieces put up. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. But this is Your Digital Life. It's a 2-cost operation transaction, and it simply reads, gain 1 credit for each card in HQ. This is 2 influence out of NBN.
Veteran Sweeps Week.
You think this is better than Sweeps Week?
I think this is better than Sweeps Week.
Why
I think
so?
the Corp has a lot more control over the number of cards in their hand. I think good players are consistently drawing up and keeping their hand full. And I think, like, if you fire a Rashida on a full hand, you go up to 9 cards. Like, this is better than Hedge Fund.
Yeah, I
and
think
for like you've got federal fundraising there to draw you more cards. Like this is, I don't think this is a super interesting card to be honest, but like it's definitely 3 more hedge funds you get to put in your deck.
It also strikes me that it's a hedge fund that only works if the game is going according to plan.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think I'm a little lower on it just because there's going to be games where you're getting your Rashida's trash, you're getting you're really being kept down, and so firing this off as the 5th card in hand is going to feel kind of bad.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting economy card in that it has some really low lows, but also some potentially like best economy single click economy card in your entire deck highs, which is like a pretty like it's going to be very polarizing and a lot about how consistently you can actually keep HQ full. And like that is going to be maybe a little bit of a problem with the asset decks, is often you're playing with like 3 cards in hand because you're trying to spam 3 cards out every turn, which is definitely going to make this a little bit trickier to use reliably in those style of decks. But when I think about something like Asmari that like can put a Rashida in a big beefy remote, maybe your digital life fits a little bit better because you're probably running bigger ice that you want to res, and like your digital life gives you a little bit of a push to make that happen. But I don't know. It's an interesting card to evaluate. I also saw some people saying, "Oh, you should play this in CI and just basically double your hand size." And I don't actually. I think there's like complex reasons, and maybe I'll do an eternal stream on CI and why I think your digital life probably won't have a place in it. But I think it's a very interesting card to kind of evaluate and think about where it goes.
Yeah, like I think one problem a lot of NBN kill decks can have, thinking of the current meta, of course, with hard-hitting news, it's a little harder to say going forward, but you can spend a ton of credits getting the runners tagged to the point where you could kill them if you just had the money for it. And it's been such a common experience trying things like the Asmari, where you end up on the runner has 2 tags and you've got 2 credits and boom in hand. And there's a few tools that can get you up to that 4 credits in 1 click in NBN from very low credits. Like Planogram doesn't quite do it from nothing, but does it from 1 credit. And non-equivalent exchange is another one that you're pretty likely to be considering for that jumping up. And this looks like another card that feels like that's probably the place it's most likely to see play, is when you need to get up from low credits quickly, because so many of your other econ options require you have 5 credits in the first place.
Yeah, like the floor of this is usually going to be like, a planogram, right? It's gaining 3 credits. So I think that's a nice floor to have on an econ card.
I don't even think that's necessarily the floor. I think the floor is this is the 3rd card in your hand.
Yeah.
And you're on your 2nd click and you're feeling really bad. Whereas you just fire off a planogram. No, granted, like it does play nice with planograms, draw 3, then immediately turn it into money. Like it's got some good synergy. But but I do think this is much softer econ than I think
in
is
deck
being given credit
building,
for.
you end up making the call between this and probably non-equivalent exchange for the same slot. And it's just going to be a question of testing and how often are you able to have HQ full, which one makes more sense in those decks.
Yeah, I will say, like, after having knocked on non-equivalent exchange, I've seen at least one deck where this card was worth playing. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see. Maybe your digital life will end up in the same space where, like, yeah, in some decks, your digital life ends up solving a problem that you need better than non-equivalent exchange and better than predictive planogram. And it's, you know, I guess also for those building a better world enjoyers out there, you know, you've got another transaction to play. So, who knows? But yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for all the cards we have to talk about today. So I might wrap us up by asking all of you to say what's the card you're most excited about trying, not just of today's spoilers, but the spoilers that we've seen across all of the days so far.
I'll jump in. I'm so excited to play Arisana and just drop programs from my hand willy-nilly and do like shaper bullshit. I'm very excited for that. Thematically though, like I'm super excited for Mercury.
Yeah, I mean, corpse side, I think Adrian is the one I'm most excited about, but runner side, both Arsana and Mercury, I think are really interesting IDs. I really like that they have a sort of way that you're clearly kind of designed to they're clearly kind of designed to build, you know, with bypass and with Trojans, but the abilities are just slightly broader than that to allow for you know, some other shenanigans. So I said before, I think the first deck I'm gonna build is a Mercury never be breaking deck.
I'm just incredibly excited to be brewing with Corp, be brewing with you know, Harmony and Ariana. Like I think that the two sort of server Jinteki is like a super interesting idea. I remember playing a lot around with Wayland Space Elevator and trying to make that work. So having the flexibility to play Spin Doctor, I think can definitely help it out. And you know, whenever a new yellow ID comes out, I just have to play a bunch of it.
Yeah, and oh, sorry, go ahead.
One thing I super want to shout out for this is I'm really enjoying how they've split the set so far from what we've seen. Like, I really appreciate that this set, we're getting so much world building in Brazil that's really leading up to what's setting up for next set in that sort of like presumably Anarch HB main conflict. And I think it's going to be a really cool like narrative arc to see the set split in this particular way and how NSG is able to like use that for a storytelling thing that we haven't seen as much in Netrunner. With the 2-pack model.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited for that too. Morgan has hinted that that set 2 is gonna get dark, so I'm looking forward to that contrast.
Yeah, and I'm personally, I am over the moon about the Shaper cards. I'm also dying to see our first HB card. So I think that's sometime in the next couple of days, and I'm hoping that it'll be a banger. But yeah, no, I think we've been really spoiled, and today was definitely a lot of fun spoilers. And I want to thank all three of you, Tberton, izzystardust, and On Holiday, for coming on. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for making it through this marathon of spoilers, and I want to thank everyone in the chat for coming along. It was a lot of fun. Sorry that I did not engage at all with the Metal, Mercury, and Chrysiopeia skimming. There was some interesting chemistry or more like alchemy lore in there, so if people want to go back and read that, I thought that was fun to follow along. And yeah, just I think that's going to do it for the stream. So thanks again to my guests. Thanks to the stream for coming on. And thanks everyone for watching.
Shout out to the PE game I played yesterday that was longer than the stream was. Thanks all.
Oh my goodness. Oh my god. I refuse to believe you just said those words. Anyway.
All right. Thanks
Have a
for
good
having
night,
me.
everyone.
Thanks for having us on. Have a good night.